We're in a mini-series at the moment based on our values, which are 3 words which we use to describe who we are as a church: home, real, and courage. And these 3 words, we hope, describe how we do things around here so that people find Jesus when they come. To help us think about those 3 values, we're using stories from the Bible about Jesus and his interactions with Martha and Mary, which are some of Jesus' friends, and Martha and Mary are sisters. Last week, Jim spoke about home and our call to both serve with plates and dishes and to be with each other face to face, a call to sit and a call to serve. And this evening, we're going to be thinking about how we as a church can be a place where we are real with one another, not seeking uniformity, but unity, not trying to be all one and the same, but be united in being real with one another. And I want to speak for a few moments about being real by choosing to exist with each other. Being real by choosing to exist with each other. And I wonder, when we think about being real, whether that's with our friends or our family or at church, does that come naturally to you, or does it freak you out a little bit? I won't lie, it freaks me out a little bit. So I wondered, who here is someone that would wear your heart on your sleeve? When someone says, "How are you doing?" you're quite willing to bear all and tell them all the emotion that you're feeling in that moment. Do we have anyone that's like that in the room? A few people? Few? Great. And who here is a little bit more reserved, a little bit more shy, a little bit like you have maybe your 1 or 2 people that would know how you're really doing, but actually not anyone else would particularly know what's going on? Who's more like that? That's probably my camp too. You see, I've often made the mistake of jumping in when someone is sharing how they're existing in that moment. When someone's being real with me, I've often made the mistake of jumping in with my own story or my own related content, probably because I feel a bit awkward about it, if I'm really honest. And I've had to learn the hard way that actually the need to exist with someone and just be alongside them is far more important than my need to explain or justify or give them a solution. When I was at school, I used to be really terrible when someone was telling a story about something that they were good at or that they were proud of. I would always have to have a better story. I hope I've grown out of that a little bit, but I know it's probably still there. And so I would be a little bit like this. Someone would be saying something, and my mind would be racing for, what's my better story? What have I done that's better? So maybe, Kath, this is your story. Hold that for me for a second. I would be like this. So Kath would share her story. And I would be like, let me whack that out of the park with a better story, okay? That's how I used to be. I know it's still there a little bit. And it's because I feel a little bit awkward about people being real, both about the good stuff and the bad stuff. And so I wondered, who here is a good listener? If someone's sharing how they're feeling, who here is good at listening? You're quite content to listen well. So a lot of good listeners in the room. Who here, a bit more like me, is in a rush to give an answer, your version of the events, your story? Anyone else like me? Good, I'm glad I'm not the only one. Thanks for your honesty. I appreciate that. You see, I have a sofa on the stage today because it's a piece of furniture that forces us to exist with other people. It forces us to come alongside one another. Sofas are designed for 2 or more people. I know that you can lounge around on one and take up the whole thing, but they're actually created for people to share life together. And Jesus models to us, in the simplest of ways, in his interaction with Martha and Mary in this story, how to create space to be real. He took space and time to get close and to experience what Martha and Mary were experiencing. He existed with them. He wept with them. When we think about being real with one another as a church, we're not simply talking about creating space to express our emotions, the good ones and the bad ones, the happy ones and the sad ones. Some of us will do that more naturally than others. We're actually talking about coming alongside one another, simply being who you are. What you see is what you get. And then choosing to exist with that other person. Choosing to allow what's real for them to be real for you. And so I don't know where you choose to have your difficult conversations. I've been married to my husband Ben for nearly 10 years, and when we first got married, I thought the way that we needed to have difficult conversations was face to face. And I learned very quickly that was a really, really bad idea. Because the tension was even more paramount because it was right between us. Now, we have our most real conversations alongside one another. It used to be in the car until we had toddlers that screamed the place down, and now it's on sofas. We have our most real conversations sat side by side on a sofa where we're actually not even looking at each other. Not because I don't like his face, but because it allows what's real for me, no matter how stupid, it allows what's real for me to come from being in between us to come out in front of us. And it allows what's real for me to become real for him because he can see it. He can see it the way I'm seeing it. And so when we sit alongside each other, when we choose to be real with one another, we allow what's real for you, what's real for them to come in front and it be understandable to the other person. When we invite people around our house, we often sit next to each other, whether it's at a dining room table or whether it's on a sofa. We enjoy hobbies sat on the sofa. We have conversations on the sofa, good ones and bad ones. We might laugh and mess around on the sofa as well as having conversations that are hard, and maybe we even console each other when we're crying on the sofa. Sitting alongside one another can create space to be real because we're just simply existing together. And the deepest, most important things can come out and in front of us so that what's real for me becomes real for them. And creating space as a church to be united in our excitement, our joy, our pain, and our sorrow. We won't ever necessarily all feel the same thing. We can't. We're unique human beings. But if we choose to be real with one another, choose to exist alongside one another, we create space to champion one another and to understand each other. And Jesus shows us that to be real to those around us, we need only simply to choose to exist with one another. The interaction Jesus has with Martha and Mary after the death of their brother contains the shortest verse in the Bible. John chapter 11, verse 35 simply says, Jesus wept. And when I read that story, I think I personally would find it much easier, I'd be much more comfortable with it if that verse was a little bit longer. If it said, Jesus wept because he was overcome with emotion, or Jesus wept because he couldn't bear seeing the pain of his friends. But that's not what's written. It just says Jesus wept. It's 2 words long because Jesus just simply existed in the moment with them, alongside them. There doesn't need to be a justification for Jesus' weeping, because to be real with one another just requires us to be with each other. One of the things that I find really, really interesting about the 2 sisters' interactions with Jesus is that they both state the same thing to him. They say, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And Martha, the sister who comes to meet him out on the road first, she goes on to say, she starts by saying, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him. What I love about that is she seems to be able to hurl at Jesus her question. Or her statement, if you had have been here, my brother wouldn't have died. She doesn't shy away from the reality and the statement that she wants to make at Jesus, and yet she can also cling to the reality that she knows something of who Jesus is, that he holds miraculous power. She can hold on to that truth that even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him. So in this moment, she can say in her pain and her anger and her frustration what she's so upset about to Jesus. Jesus, my brother is dead because you weren't here. But then she can also hold on to that truth of who Jesus is. And I don't know if you've ever tried to walk that tension in your own relationship with God. You might not even have one yet. You might be exploring faith for yourself. But actually, holding those two things in tension has been something I've had to practice a lot recently, not actually out of my own choice. Saying, God, if only you had intervened, this would have been different. God, why is this happening? God, this hurts and it should be different. But we can hold that intention with the truth that even now I know that you're faithful, that you're loving, that you're good. You see, God is big enough, loving enough for us to be real with him. He can cope with us hurling our questions at him. He can cope with the realities of our circumstances and how upset we feel with him. And he even allows us space to feel all of that and still be able to cling and hold on to the truth that we know about him, even if we're clinging on by our fingertips. Mary, the sister who's come second to Jesus, she comes to meet Jesus on the road and finds him in exactly the same place that Martha left him. And she comes before Jesus and she can do nothing other than declare, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And then all it tells us is that everyone around her is weeping. And Jesus doesn't justify why he wasn't there or explain that it's all going to be okay in a few moments' time. He's moved by her pain and he weeps. Jesus comes alongside Mary and Martha in their grief. He stands with them, he comforts them, he ministers among them. But he doesn't do things to them. He doesn't try and fix their problems too quickly. You see, the temptation when we feel uncomfortable with the idea of being real with one another is that we start to try and do things to one another. We start to try and justify things or explain things away. And in my household, I'm the one that always gets told off because I often try to solve the problem, come up with a solution. And what I've learned is that I'm really quick to try and fix things. And actually, the most helpful thing I can do is choose to exist with that person. Choose to hear their pain and allow their pain to be something that I understand. Choose to hear their joy and allow their joy to be something that I come to understand. Taking time to allow what's real for them to be real for me. And in this encounter, Martha and Mary, we see that Jesus truly understands the pain that we feel whilst we wait for his plans and purposes to unfold. Jesus chose to be fully present, existing in the moment, not moving on too quickly, not trying to solve the pain, not offering solutions. Jesus wept. What you saw is what you got. Even though Jesus knew that he was moments away from raising their brother from the dead, even though Jesus could have turned up 5 days earlier and healed him before he had died, even though God is always faithful, loving, and good, he still wept in that moment. Jesus isn't distant from the hard things of life. We have a Savior who exists in our most painful moments and our most joyful moments and every moment in between. Jesus exists with us. And so to be real with one another means to follow Jesus' model for us in this story. Exist with people while we wait for his plans and his purposes to unfold. And we hope as a church that we are creating space where we can be real with one another. But it goes far beyond our Sunday conversations tonight over nachos. You see, we want to be a church who stand and sit alongside people, choosing to exist with them. choosing to allow what's real for them to be real for us.